in the last 24 hours, 963 people have been evacuated from Kabul on the Royal Air Force air bridge. That's a significant acceleration on the numbers over the previous 24 hours and reflects, I think, that we're now fully up to speed in Kabul with military, border force and Foreign Office consular staff all now up and running. And we're looking forward to delivering similar numbers today, tomorrow and over the days ahead.
So on that basis, how long will the UK evacuation plan last?
Well, I mean, we don't have it in our gifts to say that it will last for another 5 days, 10 days, 15 days. It is clearly circumstances that are very dynamic. We are simply doing our best to maximise flow each and every day. But as my colleague, the Defence Secretary, has sadly had to say on a number of occasions, the reality is that eventually the air bridge will have to close and quite possibly not everybody will have been got out. That's what keeps us awake at night. That's what's motivating to us to work as hard as we are to ensure that those numbers are the absolute minimum.
I mean, what does other people do who aren't at the airport at the moment? One of our correspondents has been talking to the Zahiri family from London, who 13 of them went over there for a wedding. They're in Kabul. They can't at the moment get to the airport. I mean, what are the options for people like that?
So I think I'd say three things, if I may. Firstly, our understanding is that actually the Taliban are not turning people away where they have done. I've heard that it's more that they are being officious rather than malicious. And so if people are called forward for flights, they should have confidence that the Taliban will let them through to the handling centre. We know that the crowds outside the handling centre have been a barrier for many. Yesterday, we reconfigured the handling centre, did some military engineering to try to ease those crowd control challenges, which hopefully will increase flow. And then the final thing I would say is that people should not despair that the air bridge is their one route out of Afghanistan to the United Kingdom. There will be a second phase to this operation, which will see people being able to enrol at other British embassies and high commissions in the region and to be able to be resettled that way. And so even when the air bridge inevitably has to close, that's not the end of people's chances of getting to the UK.
I mean, there are reports that contract staff who protected the British embassy are now getting no protection from Great Britain. Labour calls that shameful. That's got to be looked at, hasn't it?
Well, if you're referring to the Garda World staff who protect the embassy, I can tell you that they have arrived at the airport this morning and we'll be moving them out later today.
So they are now fully covered?
Yes.
In terms of getting people out that we have relied on during our time in Afghanistan, I mean, why did the Foreign Secretary not take our responsibility to get interpreters out of Afghanistan seriously enough to take a phone call?
Well, I don't know the exact details of Foreign Office ministers' call sheets. What I can tell you, as the Secretary of State said yesterday, I know that no one phone call would have been decisive in changing the trajectory, either for the collapse of the Afghan government or indeed for the acceleration of the airlift. What I'm focused on is not recrimination over who should and shouldn't have done what when. I'm focused every single minute of every single day in making sure that the military operation to extract people from Kabul goes as well as it possibly can and that we leave as few people behind as possible.
But if you're focused on that every minute of every day, you'd expect your colleagues to do the same, wouldn't you? If the Foreign Secretary wouldn't make a phone call or take a phone call and it's passed on to his junior and that phone call still doesn't take place, if the Defence Secretary said, as he said, we knew that the Afghan government was melting like ice on Friday and yet the Prime Minister then heads off on holiday on Saturday, I mean, it does raise questions, doesn't it, about the commitment of your colleagues?
I can only tell you what I see in the meetings and phone calls that I have all the way through every day, have done for the last week, will do for the next one. And what I see is that from the Prime Minister to Secretaries of State, to my junior ministerial colleagues around government, to senior civil servants, all the way down to the brave volunteer civil servants who have gone forward to Kabul from the Border Force, from the MOD and from the Foreign Office, is people across Her Majesty's government working their backsides off in order to get people out. I completely understand why the media want to ask these sorts of questions. It's entirely reasonable, but you'll forgive me perhaps if I focus on the job at hand, and hopefully be reassured if I tell you that absolutely every colleague at every level, be they political, military or civil service, is doing everything they possibly can to make sure that we get as many people out as quickly as we possibly can.
I mean, you served, you've got a better understanding of this than certainly a lot of your colleagues who haven't served and done a tour of duty in Afghanistan. Everyone's talking about being blindsided by this, and certainly it was a very rapid operation by the Taliban, but it's emerged in a report submitted to the government in January. It laid out what sort of risks the US withdrawal posed to all of this. So there's been 8 months of planning time. So why has the UK government, let's forget about every other country, why has the UK government been blindsided by this?
Well, I don't think I accept that characterisation of what's happened over the last week. Absolutely, we've been blindsided by the speed of the collapse of the Afghan government and the speed at which the Taliban have been able to take control. But there was a plan for the drawdown of British troops in Afghanistan called Opcatalo that has been in place since the beginning of last year, because the Doha agreement that President Trump signed meant that on the 1st of May this year, in theory, we were going to be leaving. And so we've had a plan for that all along. Likewise, op-pitting, which is the evacuation of entitled personnel and those who have worked alongside us, that's a plan of long standing. So both of the plans that have been executed over the last few months and are in progress right now in the terms of op-pitting have long since been devised and we're ready to go. The bit that's caught us out, and I don't think anybody can deny this, is that everything happened far more quickly than we ever thought it would.
As a veteran of Afghanistan, what did you make of General Sir Nick Carter, Chief of the Defence Staff, who said on this programme a couple of days ago, the Taliban are country lads with a moral code, not our enemy? I'm obviously not quoting him directly there, but those are the words he said. What impact does that have on veterans? What impact does it have on the families of the 457? What impact does it have on serving armed forces personnel?
Well, I think that actually to veterans and to serving personnel, we're probably the audience that gets what CDS was saying more than anybody else, because, the 3 operational campaigns that I served in Northern Ireland, Iraq, and 2 tours to Afghanistan. In Northern Ireland, by the end, people like Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, who had been in the IRA, were a part of government. In Iraq, people like Muqtada al-Sadr, who was the leader of
Forgive me, Minister, for jumping in, but we are a bit tight for time. Look, I've been in contact with a lot of members of the armed forces over the past few days. They're not on board with what the Chief of the Defence Staff was saying. They're absolutely furious. Morale is at rock bottom, and you only have to look at what was posted on Forces TV when they played out our interview on Instagram and look at the hundreds of comments below to see if people are not on board with this, whether they're currently serving or veterans. They're furious.
Well, I think you should let me make the point that I was making, which is that we get that when we go off to fight, we are a means to an end, but we are not the end in itself, and that very often the peace that follows that is imperfect. And just as members of the IRA are now in government in Northern Ireland, the people who were leading the insurgency that we were fighting in Iraq are now the key power brokers for a government that we're working with in Baghdad. It was always inevitable that the Taliban would be part of the solution in Afghanistan. It makes me sick, of course it does, to see the scenes that we're seeing in Afghanistan. I gave some of the best years of my life and I risked my life in Afghanistan. But when I was patrolling in Sangin in 2009 or in Kabul in 2005, I was doing my best to make a difference in those 6 months to the lives of the people that lived in those communities. What's happening now is for politicians to answer for. But the fact that the Taliban are part of the peace, as painful as that is for people like me who have served, it was always going to be the reality.
What would you say, though, to the mother of a young soldier who lost their lives in Afghanistan, you know, I don't know, 8 years ago, when they hear Sir Nick Carter say, these are country lads with a moral code?
Look, I have been at many military funerals. I have held the hand of bereaved mothers when they've been presented with their Elizabeth Cross. I have already many times had to look people in the eye and reassure them that the sacrifice that their son made was not in vain. I don't think that anything that has happened over the last week in any way detracts from what our brave servicemen and women did in those extraordinary years whilst we were in Helmand. And my message to veterans, to the bereaved families of those who never came home, is that they should continue to take pride in the bravery and the sacrifice of their loved ones, because they did an amazing job whilst we were in Afghanistan. Nothing can ever take that away from them. Politicians will be held to account for the outcome, but nothing diminishes the bravery, the courage, the determination, the professionalism, and in too many cases, the sacrifice that our people put in during those difficult years in Helmand.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Thank you.